I want to talk for a minute about ideal livestock production versus the industrial meat system. Now, many of you have probably heard all these different arguments about meat and how it's raised, and I'm not here to talk about whether to eat meat or not. That's a personal choice. But I do believe that animal agriculture can be a really, really good thing for our planet and for our health. And so I wanted to talk a little bit. I'm going to start with ideal production and kind of go over that a little bit in terms of how we do it, how the ideals are done, versus, again, how it's done industrially. Now, if you buy meat in the store or at your favorite restaurant, if they get it from a distributor, chances are it's coming from this model. It has to have been gone through a federally inspected slaughter plant. That is the federal rules. And so in some form or another, all meat that we buy at stores has gone through this system, this industrial system, which is why we wanted to start our farm and see if we could do something different, like a lot of other farmers are doing. Now, in an ideal system, the animals are born naturally. There's very little assistance. They're able to do their animal thing in how they're born, in how they're raised. Ideally, they're raised outdoors on pasture with other animals. They're raised in a social environment because very few animals actually like to be isolated. They're fed local feeds from grasses and forages to local waste streams. They're harvested humanely and calmly. And then we honor the whole animal by using almost all of it for our own needs. It's to say we honor this life, and we're going to use all of this for our needs. From there, ideally the meat and what's left is shared with our families and our friends. And if there's any compost from either the raising process or the slaughter process or the cooking process, that could be composted on a small scale and returned to the soil to have good, healthy soils. Good, healthy soils are going to raise good grasses and plants. That's going to sequester carbon. That's going to create strong ecosystems. This system can actually be a very strong net benefit to help create resilient, local, sustainable food systems. I really think as a country, that's been part of the thing, independence. And I think that having a lot of small farms operating like this is truly how we're going to create independence. And so again, coming over to the industrial side, now one of the facts that's thrown out there a lot is that 97% of farms in this country are family owned, which is awesome. But that 3% that's left, that's corporate owned or whatever, they own 97% of the livestock. So again, most of what we buy in the stores, most of what's available at restaurants, chances are it's gone through all or part of this system. In the industrial system, let me say it's a little different than what we're doing. Animals are probably born in crates. In the case of pigs, they're born in farrowing crates, and that's because the genetics that they use in this system, they're just meant to grow fast. They're not meant to be good moms. And so they actually say, well, we have them born in crates for humane reasons so that the mom doesn't squish all the babies. And because of that breed in genetics, it is actually necessary to have them born in cages like that. And then from there, they're raised in cages. Really tight pens, packed in, in case of hogs and chickens at least, mostly in windowless buildings. With huge ventilation systems to try to bring in fresh air, but I guarantee it does not smell fresh in there. I've been in one, and no. In these tight pens, they're probably just fed, some sort of GMO food. There was one story I heard in the news about there was a cattle feeding operation that they had truckloads of gummy bears that they were feeding to these cows. Because for whatever reason the gummy bears weren't good for humans, so feed them to the cows in the CAFO. And also there's rainforest cleared all over the world to grow soy and corn and all kinds of stuff, and most of it's genetically engineered to resist Roundup, so they just spray Roundup all over it. Anyways, not a great system. But and then from there, They're fed out in these tight pens, loaded into trucks live, shipped to the slaughterhouse, where they're typically measured in, kills per minute. Poultry, chicken, the industrial standard is 124 birds per minute. So that's a lot of birds. They're probably running 2 shifts. They're running that 16 hours a day. They close down typically for a cleaning shift because they have to. They probably wouldn't if they didn't have to. But so yeah, they're doing that every day, every week of the year. 124 birds a minute per slaughterhouse, and there's a lot of poultry slaughterhouses in this country on the big scale. Actually, there's not too many, but they are big, the ones that they are there. From the slaughterhouse, typically about 50% of the animal is actually used for human consumption. The rest of that maybe is going to go to some dog food, but mostly it's going to go to industrial uses, greases and such like that. That's where the rest of that animal is going to go, is into industrial processes. After that, it's packed in these massive warehouses, shipped to your store, shipped to your restaurant. And then at home, again, most of us typical Americans waste about 30% of our food. That's 30% of our food bill, by the way. And so there's just a lot of waste throughout the process. And yet somehow, this is what's been figured to get cheap food. This is how we get meat, most of the meat in this country. But like I said, there are a lot of other small farmers doing some version of this system. And even when we consider what we consider small farms, I think is partially what I wanted to convey here. We used to get a lot of comments when we had 600 laying hens. We get a lot of people saying, wow, that's a lot. And I always had to kind of chuckle because, it's not a lot. We're tiny in every sense of the word. Typical laying hen operations, again, where you're going to get eggs in a grocery store, or how you're going to get your eggs at your breakfast at a restaurant, is probably going to come from these hen houses, whether they're organic, free range, it doesn't really matter. All those terms are used for these giant factories that have like 30,000 birds per house, and they probably have several houses per factory. So again, when you hear someone say, "Oh, I have 2,000 laying hens on my farm," or 600 or 100, you have to realize that is tiny. Gunthorpe Farms, who is a processor, they do a great job raising their animals out on pasture, and they have their own USDA slaughter plant and processing plant on their farm. And they do about 100,000 chickens a year, and they're considered a very small processing plant by the USDA. So again, just to give you an idea of scale, and I want to encourage everyone to support small farmers, even if the numbers may sound big to you. Even a few thousand pigs a year is tiny and can be done in this kind of more idealized system that's more local. In this case, again, they're born naturally. They live outdoors with other animals. They're fed local forage, especially in the case of beef and goats and lamb, they can be fed grass. They're superpowers that they turn grass to meat. It's amazing. And they don't need any grains. Pigs and chickens they have a higher calorie, protein, fat needs. But there's so much within our systems that we can do that. In our particular case, we live in grain country. We can get wheat, the cracked wheat and stuff that doesn't quite meet the grade for human consumption can go to our pigs. We've been getting apples and pears, again, that didn't meet the grade in the industrial model to feed out to humans. And so we've been getting those and feeding them to our pigs and chickens. And so we can keep that system really localized so we're not shipping stuff all over the planet. Again, in this model, there's stuff shipped all over the place. Trucks, trailers, animals, just all over the place. Again, when we can simplify that, we can bring it in and say, no, we can do this differently. We can do this better. It's what got us into it. We really wanted to figure out a better way to raise meat specifically. By the way, the industrial scale, this can be applied to vegetables, this can be applied to to fiber for clothes, building materials. It doesn't matter. It's a similar scale that I think, especially in the last like 30 to 50 years, has gotten so big that it's hard to comprehend how big these operations are. When you hear the numbers, it's staggering. And so I think in order to create a more resilient, sustainable local economy that can weather things like climate change or global catastrophes, we need a decentralized system that relies on a lot of actual humans doing the work throughout it and really caring for the animals, caring for the soils. These are the things that differentiate what we're doing on a small scale versus the industrial model. And while our prices might seem very different, and you say, well, there must be efficiencies, there must be things that they're doing in this that make it so cheap, right? There's got to be good things. It's largely because they're not accounting for several costs like air pollution, water pollution, greenhouse gas emissions. Those things aren't a part of their equation. They're not a part of that end price that you pay for what you eat. Whereas what we're doing is we're accounting for those things. We're accounting for how the soil's taken care of, how the animal's taken care of, how the people are taken care of that are working within the system. And so, again, I just wanted to kind of explain a little bit of this. Hope it makes sense. Feel free to comment if you have questions. This has been kind of my study throughout my career of like trying to figure out how we can make our food system more resilient. And so I enjoy the discussions around this. So again, feel free to comment, especially if I missed anything. If you feel like I missed anything in either model, feel free to comment. And again, support your local farmers, no matter where you are. Ideally, if you're in our area, you support our farm, but there's other farmers even in our area, and I encourage that regardless. Because again, we need more of this and less of this for our planet and for our health. So hope you enjoyed my video. Have a good one.